Jae-min controlled an empire from a glass tower in Gangnam, 12 shipping lanes, 3 logistics companies, side arrangements most people in Seoul preferred not to know about. He was 41 years old, unmarried, and the kind of man who made decisions that affected hundreds of people without losing a minute of sleep. He was shot on a Tuesday night at 11:47 p.m. in the underground parking garage of a restaurant he'd owned for 6 years. 2 bullets. One in the shoulder. One in the chest 3 centimeters from his heart. The man who pulled the trigger had eaten dinner with him that same evening. By midnight, 3 black SUVs were racing through Seoul toward Samsung Medical Center. Jae-min was unconscious in the back seat, bleeding through the jacket someone had pressed against his chest. His second-in-command, Choi Min-suk, sat beside him with his phone against his ear, already making the calls that needed to be made. His expression was calm, almost too calm for a man watching his boss die. The emergency doors blew open. Gurneys scraped against tile. Voices crossed each other in rapid Korean. Doctors. Nurses. Machines. The fluorescent light of the trauma bay was brutal and white, and it turned everyone inside it into something sharp and angular. Jae-min was wheeled through the corridor at speed. That was when it happened. A small girl was sitting in a plastic chair outside a consultation room, wrapped in a yellow blanket too big for her body. She was 4 years old, maybe 5. Dark-skinned, with tight natural curls pressed flat against her forehead from the damp heat of a fever that had been running since morning. Her eyes were half open. Tired. Watching the ceiling the way sick children do when they've run out of energy to be afraid. When the gurney passed, she sat up straight. She didn't cry. She didn't call out. She just reached out her small arm, and by some alignment of distance and timing that made no rational sense, her fingers closed around the hand of the unconscious man as the gurney moved past her chair. 1 second. Maybe 2. Then the nurses pushed through the next set of doors, and her hand fell away, and she was alone again in her plastic chair with her yellow blanket. Her mother, Naomi Bryce, came running from the vending machine at the end of the hall, a paper cup of tea in her hand, and found her daughter sitting perfectly still, staring at the swinging doors the gurney had disappeared through. Lila. Naomi crouched down in front of her. Baby, what happened? Lila looked at her mother with those quiet, serious eyes she'd had since birth. The man was hurt, she said. Naomi looked at the doors. She pulled her daughter close and held her, and neither of them said anything else. 3 weeks later, Jae-min was declared brain dead. The neurosurgeon explained it quietly to Choi Min-suk in a private consultation room. Severe hypoxic brain injury secondary to hemorrhagic shock. There was minimal activity on the EEG. The damage was extensive. The probability of meaningful recovery was, in his professional opinion, negligible. Min-suk nodded at all the right moments. He asked several careful questions. He shook the doctor's hand when it was time to leave. Then he went back to running the empire. Jae-min's room was on the 6th floor, southeast wing. For the first week, there had been men posted outside his door and associates cycling through to pay their respects. Business continued to move. Arrangements were made. The world did not stop for the man in the bed. By the 2nd week, the visits had thinned. By the 3rd week, the only people who came were the nurses. He lay in the bed with machines breathing for him. His face was still. The monitors above the bed drew their slow green lines across the screen. The room smelled of antiseptic and something colder underneath it. The window faced east. In the mornings, light came through the blinds and crossed the floor in pale strips and moved slowly across the linoleum as the hours passed. And nobody was there to notice it. That was the state of Jae-min. A man who had spent his entire life accumulating power, abandoned in a room where he had none. This is where Lila comes back into the story. Naomi Bryce had come to Seoul 18 months earlier under circumstances she did not advertise. She was 32, from Atlanta originally, then Baltimore, then a series of places that had not quite worked out. In Seoul she had a work visa, a small apartment in Mapogu she shared with 2 other women, and a hospital job that paid enough to send money home every month and save a little for an envelope in the back of her drawer labeled simply home. She was a nursing aide on the night shift. Patient transport, vital checks, linen changes, bathroom assistance, the invisible labor that kept hospitals running while everyone else slept. She did her work quietly and thoroughly and without complaint. Lila's father was not in the picture. He had made a decision when Naomi was 6 weeks pregnant that revealed exactly who he was. Naomi had made her own decision in response and had not looked back. Lila had been born alert. She had always been a child who watched before she moved, who listened before she spoke, who understood the weight of things before she was old enough to name them. She was small for her age, caught colds easily, and had a habit of adopting injured things. Birds with broken wings, beetles flipped on their backs. Once a pigeon that had flown into a window and sat stunned on the sidewalk for 20 minutes while Lila stood guard, refusing to let anyone walk past. The fever that had brought them to Samsung Medical Center 3 weeks ago had resolved. Lila was fine. The doctor had said so. She could go home. But she did not want to go home. "There's a man," she told her mother on the 4th morning. In the serious way she said things that were not up for debate. "He's alone. Baby, there are a lot of sick people in this hospital," Naomi said. "The man from the hallway. The one they were rushing." Lila looked at her mother. "He's alone. Nobody comes." Naomi had noticed. She worked the nights. She knew which rooms had families and which rooms didn't. She knew the sound of a corridor that got no visitors. The southeast wing, 6th floor, had been quiet for over a week. "That's not our business, Lila. Can we just sit with him?" Naomi was quiet for a moment. She had a shift in 4 hours. She was tired in the particular way that single mothers working night shifts in foreign countries learn to carry without showing. She looked at her daughter. "For a little while," she said. They went that afternoon. Room 614. The door was half open. Naomi stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the man in the bed. He was Korean, probably early 40s, with a kind of face that had once been composed and certain and was now simply still. The machines around him breathed and beeped in their steady rhythms. And 4-line ran into his left arm. His hands rested at his sides on top of the blanket. Lila walked straight in without hesitation. She climbed onto the chair beside the bed. She settled herself with her yellow blanket across her lap. She looked at the man for a long moment, the way she had looked at the stunned pigeon, with a seriousness that made her seem much older than she was. Then she said quietly, "You have people. They just forgot." Naomi stood in the doorway and did not know what to do with the feeling that moved through her chest. They stayed for 40 minutes. Lila sat in her chair. She did not touch him. She did not talk constantly. She sat the way people sit in churches, present and quiet and purposeful. When it was time to leave, she folded her yellow blanket carefully and placed it on the arm of the chair. "So he knows someone was here," she explained to her mother. They came back the next day. And the day after that. By the end of the first week, it had become a routine that Naomi had not officially agreed to and could not seem to stop. Lila would eat dinner. She would do the small exercises the physiotherapist had recommended for her lungs. Then she would say, "Can we go see the man now?" And something in Naomi's chest would prevent her from saying no. On the 5th visit, Naomi started talking. It began without intention. She was sitting across the room from Lila, who was in her chair beside the bed, and the silence felt thick and strange, and before she'd made a decision about it, Naomi heard her own voice. "I don't usually talk to strangers," she said. "But you're not exactly in a position to judge." Nothing moved in the room except the green lines on the monitor. "My name is Naomi. I'm from Atlanta. I've been in Seoul for about a year and a half, which is long enough to stop being surprised by things but not long enough to stop feeling like an outsider." She paused. "That little girl sitting next to you is my daughter, Lila. She's the reason I do everything. I want you to know that, in case it matters." She looked at the window. The late afternoon light was doing something golden on the floor. "She thinks you're lonely." She's probably right. She usually is about things like that. She went quiet. The machines kept their rhythm. The next night, she came alone during her shift. It was 2:30 in the morning, and the floor was hushed, and she had 15 minutes before her next rounds. She sat in Lila's chair, the one with the yellow blanket folded on the armrest, and she talked to him again. She talked about Atlanta, about the way her grandmother had cooked on Sundays, the smell of it, how it was the one smell she could not replicate no matter how hard she tried. She talked about what it cost to believe in something long enough to cross an ocean for it. She came back the following night, and the one after that. She did not understand entirely why she kept coming. She was not a sentimental woman. She had not arrived at 32 with her particular history by indulging feelings that served no practical purpose. But there was something in the silence of that room that required filling, and she was the only one filling it, and somehow that felt like it mattered. "You had people," she said one night. "Men in suits the first week. They stopped coming. I don't know what happened between you and them. Maybe you do wherever you are." She looked at his face. Still, composed even in unconsciousness. "But you should know someone is still in this room. Every day. A 4-year-old girl with a yellow blanket and more sense than most adults I've ever met." She stood up to leave. "And me," she added, not to him, not quite to herself, but to the room, to the truth of it, because it needed to be said out loud at least once. "You've got me too. For whatever that's worth. If this story is already holding you, hit that like button and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Subscribe if you're new. We're just getting started." It was the 12th night. Lila had been running a low fever since evening. Not dangerous, the doctors said, but uncomfortable. Naomi had brought her to the 6th floor anyway because Lila had asked, and the request had been so earnest and so certain that Naomi had not had the heart to refuse. But by 10 o'clock the fever climbed. 102, then 103. Lila's skin was hot under Naomi's palm. Her breathing had gone shallow and quick. The breath of a child who was fighting something her small body was not winning. The nurses had been called. Medication was coming. But Lila was whimpering now, which was the thing she never did. And Naomi was holding her on her lap in the chair beside Jae-min's bed. And Lila was pressing her face against her mother's chest. And it wasn't enough. "Mama," Lila said, and her voice was thin and frightened. "Mama, it hurts." "I know, baby. I know. The medicine's coming. I'm hot." "I know. Mama." Lila looked up at her with those serious eyes, glassy now with fever. "Put me on the man." "What?" "Put me on his chest. Like when I have bad dreams and you put me on your chest and it helps." She was barely whispering. "He's always so still. Maybe still helps." Naomi looked at the man in the bed. The machines. At her daughter. Every rational part of her said no. This was a comatose patient. There were protocols. There were lines. But Lila's body was burning and shaking, and the medicine hadn't come, and her daughter was crying without sound now. Just tears tracking down her feverish face. And Naomi had crossed an ocean on belief before. She stood up carefully. She lowered Lila down until the child's chest was resting against Jae-min's chest. She kept one hand firmly on Lila's back. The other she pressed to the bed rail, steadying herself. Lila went still almost immediately, the way small bodies sometimes surrender to warmth. Then something on the monitor changed. It was subtle at first. A small spike in the brain activity readout, the kind that could be dismissed as artifact. Naomi did not notice it right away. She was watching her daughter's breathing. Then a second spike. Larger. Then the heart rate monitor shifted. Climbed. Steadied at a higher plateau. An alarm sounded. Not a crash alarm. Not the flatline sound of a death alarm. Something else. Something that brought a nurse running, and then a doctor, and then 2 more people, and then the room was full of people and lights and sound, and Naomi was pressing Lila against her, stepping back toward the wall, and every person in that room was staring at the same thing. Jae-min's hand had moved. Not a reflex. Not a spasm. His hand had moved toward the small weight that had rested on his chest. His fingers had curled slowly, as if reaching for something. As if, from wherever he had been, he had felt something worth returning for. "He's responding," the doctor said, her voice clipped and fast. "Get the attending. Call neurology. Now." The room erupted. And Jae-min's eyes opened. They were slow to focus. The lights were too bright, and the world was too loud, and nothing made sense in the way the world sometimes refuses to make sense after it has been very far away for a very long time. But there was weight on his chest. Small and warm. His hand found it. His fingers closed around what felt like a small arm. And he held it the way a man holds the one thing in a room he is certain of. The doctors descended on him with questions, with lights, with instruments. He answered what he could. His voice was barely a sound. His body felt like it had been buried and dug back up. But his hand stayed where it was. Lila, pressed against her mother on the far side of the room, was watching him. The fever had broken. She looked at her mother with those quiet, serious eyes. "See," she said. "He wasn't really gone. He was just waiting." Naomi's hand went over her mouth. She did not cry easily. She had not cried easily in many years. But standing in that room, with the monitor singing and the doctors working and her daughter watching a man who had just returned from somewhere unreachable, something cracked open in Naomi's chest that she had kept locked and sealed and armored for a very long time. She bent her head. She pressed her fingers hard against her lips. And she let it come. Just for a moment. Just enough. Then she breathed and she straightened and she held her daughter tight. Jae-min spent 3 more weeks in the ICU. He remembered fragments of his time unconscious. Not images. Sounds. A voice, low and steady, that had spoken about Atlanta and a grandmother's kitchen, and the smell of something that could not be replicated. A presence. Small and warm, returning daily, settling in beside him with a patience that made no demands. He had heard all of it. On the 8th day of his recovery, when he was well enough to hold a conversation, he asked the attending physician who had been in his room. The doctor looked puzzled. "Your associates stopped coming after the 2nd week. I'm afraid." "Not associates." Jae-min's voice was still rough, healing. "A woman. And a child." The doctor paused. "There is a nursing aide who works the night shift. She and her daughter have been visiting your room for several weeks. It was actually the child who was present when you regained consciousness." Jae-min was quiet. "The child's name," he said. "I believe it's Lila." He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he said, "I want to meet them." Naomi was in the middle of her shift when the senior nurse found her and said that the patient in 614 was asking for her. Naomi stood in the hallway for a full 10 seconds before moving. She had thought, after he woke, that they would simply dissolve back into the background the way background people do. She had prepared herself for that. She had even explained it to Lila. "He's awake now, baby. He has his own people. They'll come back. We can be happy for him from a distance." Lila had looked at her with an expression that clearly communicated she did not believe this. Now Naomi stood in the doorway of 614, and the man she had talked to for 12 nights was awake and looking at her. And the power of his gaze was something she had not anticipated. He had the eyes of a man who processed information at a speed that most people could not follow. Even reduced, even recovering, there was something in him that was alert and measuring and very, very awake. "You're Naomi," he said. "I am. Your grandmother made something that smelled like Sunday mornings." Naomi's breath caught. "You heard me. I heard everything." His voice was careful. The voice of a man who chose his words with deliberate precision. "I want you to know that." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the wall. Then she looked back at him. "Okay. Where's your daughter?" "She's in school. She goes in the mornings." Something shifted in his expression. The faintest softening, barely visible, like a change in weather that you feel before you see it. "She sat with me every day. She chose to." "Why?" Naomi looked at him steadily. "Because she said you were alone. And she didn't think that was right." The room was quiet for a moment. "She was right," Jae-min said. Choi Min-suk received the call at 7:14 in the morning and sat with the phone in his hand for 30 seconds. Jae-min was awake, responsive. Recovery was possible, significant, perhaps full. Min-suk set the phone down on his desk, Jae-min's desk, and looked at the city through the floor-to-ceiling glass. 41 days of running the empire as he had always believed it should be run, of moving pieces that had needed moving, of positioning himself in places that had been closed to him. He made 2 calls, chose his next moves with the same care he always chose things. Jae-min was awake, but recovery was not the same as return. He would have time. Jae-min asked to meet Lila on a Thursday. Naomi brought her after school. Lila was wearing her green coat and her school bag was still on her back when she walked into room 614, and she stopped at the threshold the way she always stopped at thresholds, reading the room before she entered it. Jae-min was sitting up in bed. He had been moved out of the ICU. He still had lines, still had monitors, but he was sitting, and the difference between a man lying flat and a man sitting upright was enormous. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You're awake," Lila said. "I am." She walked to the chair beside his bed. Her chair. She took her school bag off her back and set it on the floor. She sat down and folded her hands in her lap the way she always did and looked at him with her quiet, serious eyes. "I knew you would be," she said. "How did you know?" "Because you were still there." "I could tell." She tilted her head. "Sometimes people are gone and you can tell. You weren't gone. You were just very far." Jae-min looked at this child for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Lila Bryce." "I'm Han Jae-min." "I know. The nurses told me." She glanced at her school bag. "I drew you something. I was going to put it in your room for when you woke up, but since you're already awake, I'll just give it to you." She unzipped her bag and produced a folded piece of paper and held it out. He took it. He opened it carefully. It was a drawing. 2 figures. One tall, one small. Beside a window. Outside the window, something that might have been stars or might have been the city lights from the 6th floor. Seen through the eyes of a child who made everything she looked at into something worth looking at. "That's you and me," she confirmed. "In your room. When you get better." Jae-min held the drawing in his hands and did not speak for a moment. "Thank you, Lila," he said finally. "You're welcome." She pulled her bag back onto her lap. "You have to actually get better now. I told everyone you would." His mouth moved. Something that wasn't quite a smile but was in that direction. "Then I will," he said. 2 weeks into his recovery, Jae-min began asking questions. Naomi had not expected this. She had expected a powerful man returning to power, receding from the particular circumstances of his vulnerability, back into a world that would quickly absorb him. Instead, he asked her about her visa status, about her apartment, about the hours she was working. He asked with the directness of a man who gathered information as a reflex, but also with something underneath it that was less cold than it initially appeared. "You're not asking because you're curious," she told him one evening. She had stopped in during her shift because Lila was with a neighbor and she had 20 minutes, and because, if she was being honest with herself, she had come to think of this room as a place she did not mind being. "No," he agreed. "Then why?" He looked at her in that way he had, the way that felt like being assessed by something exceptionally precise. "You and your daughter sat with me for 12 days when I had nothing and no one. I want to know what you need." "We don't need anything. Everyone needs something, Naomi." She looked at the window. "Don't start keeping score. That's not why we came." "I know." A pause. "But I want to anyway." She was quiet. She looked back at him. "My visa renewal is coming up in 4 months. It's complicated because of my work classification. The immigration lawyer I was going to use fell through." He nodded once. "I'll make some calls." "That's not." "It's not charity," he said. "I don't do charity. It's a transaction. You gave me something. I'm returning it." His voice was matter of fact. "The only question is whether you're going to be difficult about accepting it." Naomi looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "You're very strange for someone who almost died." "I've been told I'm strange in general." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "For months. If your calls come through, they will." She stood up to leave. At the door she paused. "Your people," she said carefully. "The ones who stopped coming. You should know they stopped very fast." He was already looking at her when she turned. His expression had not changed. "I know," he said. "I'm counting on them thinking I don't." He was discharged on a Saturday morning in November. He had spent the last week of his hospital stay learning things he did not like learning. Min-suk had been moving. The restructuring of 2 of the logistics companies had been done in ways that insulated them from Jae-min specifically. Certain loyalties had been realigned. The arrangements were subtle, the kind of thing that looked like ordinary business management until you looked at the pattern, and Jae-min had spent 20 years looking at patterns. There was a quiet war coming. He had known it since the moment Min-suk's expression had been too calm in the parking garage. He had simply needed time to know it consciously. But the morning he was discharged, what he thought about was not the war. He thought about an apartment in Mapo-gu that was too small and shared by too many people. He thought about a visa renewal. He thought about a school bag being set on a floor and a pair of small hands folded in a lap and a drawing of two figures beside a window. He made 3 calls on the way home. 1 to his lawyer. 1 to a property manager he trusted. 1 to the director of immigration services who owed him a favor from 2019 and had been waiting for him to collect. Naomi received an envelope the following Monday. Inside was a document. It was the lease agreement for an apartment in Songdong-gu. 3 bedrooms. A school within walking distance. A month-to-month arrangement managed through a holding company she did not recognize. There was a note. For sentences. This is the transaction. No strings. Lila should have a room that is only hers. The immigration paperwork is being handled. Naomi read it twice. She sat down on the edge of the bed she shared with Lila in the apartment in Mapo-gu, and read it a 3rd time. Then she picked up her phone and called the number that had appeared on her screen 3 days ago, when he had called to tell her he was leaving the hospital. He answered on the 2nd ring. This is too much, she said. It isn't. Jae-min. Naomi. Paused between them. Why? She asked. Not aggressively. Genuinely. She needed to understand. Because your daughter told a dying man that he was not alone, he said. And she was right. And now I'm not dying anymore. His voice was steady and clean. This is what I do when I'm not dying. I make things right. She looked at the lease agreement in her hand. I need you to know we didn't do this for anything. We didn't come to your room because we wanted something. I know that. That's exactly why I'm giving you something. The quiet stretched between them. 1 condition, she said. Name it. You come for dinner when you're strong enough. Real dinner. Not hospital food, not favors. Lila will cook. She's been learning Korean recipes from a YouTube channel, and she's terrible at it, but she's very proud of herself. There was a pause on the line. Something that sounded, possibly, like the beginning of a real laugh, caught and held before it could fully form. I'll be there, he said. If this story has you in your feelings right now, comment below what hit you hardest. Like and share with someone who needs this today. The dinner happened on a Friday evening in December. Lila had made doenjang jjigae. It was, by objective standards, aggressively oversalted. She had also attempted japchae, which was slightly better, and a rice dish that had burned slightly on the bottom but was fine once you scraped past the crust. Jae-min ate all of it. He sat at their table in the apartment in Songdong-gu, at the small round table that Lila had set with the care of someone preparing a state dinner, complete with a paper flower she had made at school placed in a cup in the center. He ate what he was given. He complimented the doenjang jjigae with sincerity. Lila watched him from across the table with the focused attention she gave to important things. Is it good? She asked. It's very good. My mama says it needs less salt. Your mama is wrong, he said. Naomi across the table raised an eyebrow. Jae-min held her gaze without flinching. Lila beamed. After dinner, Lila showed him her drawings. She had an entire notebook of them. She narrated each one with the seriousness of a curator. This was the view from the hospital window. This was her mother working. This was a cat she had seen on the street. This was him in his bed before he woke up. He held the drawing of himself unconscious for a long time. I kept drawing you, Lila said, so I wouldn't forget to pray for you. Jae-min set the drawing down carefully. He looked at the child in front of him and felt something move through the careful architecture of his chest, something he had not felt in a very long time, something that was not power and not strategy and not anything he could quantify. He felt claimed. He had not been claimed by anything in 20 years. Not by blood, not by loyalty. The people around him had always been there for the empire. Nobody had ever sat beside him in a hospital room every day for 12 days simply because they decided he should not be alone. This child had. Lila, he said. Yes. Thank you. For all of it. She considered this with great seriousness. Then she nodded. You're welcome. You can come back next Friday if you want. I'm going to try Galbi Gym. He looked at Naomi. Naomi was looking at her daughter with the expression of a woman who understood that her life was being quietly and completely rearranged by a 4-year-old, and had made peace with it. I'll be here, Jae-min said. The war with Min-suk came to a head in January. It was not dramatic the way these things rarely are when the person on the other side is intelligent. Min-suk had restructured enough to give himself legal control of 2 of the 3 subsidiary companies. He had built relationships with 2 board members who had old reasons to resent Jae-min. He had positioned himself to make Jae-min's return look voluntary, transitional. What he had not accounted for was how carefully Jae-min had been watching from the hospital bed. Jae-min spent 3 weeks collecting a message here, a document there. The kind of information that circulates in financial structures when the people managing them believe the original owner is gone. Then he made 1 call to the board chairman and presented what he had. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Min-suk was removed before evening. It was not violent. Jae-min had decided, somewhere in the white light of recovery, that he was done with things that required violence. He had always known the world ran on information and leverage. He had simply been willing to use other tools when it suited him. He was no longer sure it suited him. He sent Min-suk a message afterward. Brief. You made your choices. I made mine. We're done. Then he went to Lila's school play. She was performing as a tree. She had 3 lines, delivered with the intensity of someone who had been practicing since November. She spotted him in the 3rd row and broke character for exactly 2 seconds to wave, then snapped her attention back to the performance. Naomi, beside him, made a sound that was trying very hard not to be a laugh. He understood in that moment what had happened to him. Not just the waking up. The deeper thing. The reorientation of everything he had spent 20 years building toward. Away from the glass tower and the empire and toward this. A child in a tree costume. A woman beside him in a dark auditorium who had talked to him for 12 nights when he was too far away to answer. This was what he had returned for. February brought a new problem, and it arrived the way the worst problems do, quietly, through a door you hadn't thought to guard. Lila had been tired for weeks. Not the tired of a growing child who runs too hard and sleeps too heavy. A different tired. Flat. The kind of fatigue that sits on a child's face like something borrowed from an adult. She stopped eating as much. She developed bruises that appeared without explanation and took too long to fade. She was pale in a way that looked wrong against her brown skin, a grayness underneath that Naomi had been cataloging privately and refusing to name. Naomi took her to the pediatrician on a Monday. By Wednesday there were blood tests. By Friday, Naomi was sitting in a consultation room while a doctor spoke words that she heard clearly and understood completely and felt, at the same time, as if someone were saying them from the bottom of a very deep well. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The aggressive variant. Treatable, the doctor said. They had caught it before it progressed to the point of no return. Treatment would begin immediately. There were good outcomes, strong odds with this diagnosis at her age, excellent outcomes in pediatric leukemia overall. The doctor said many more things after that. Naomi heard the shape of them. She called Jae-min from the parking structure outside the hospital. She was sitting in her car. She had not cried yet. She would not cry yet. Lila is sick, she said when he answered. Leukemia. They're starting treatment. The silence on his end lasted 2 seconds. 3. Which hospital? She told him. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. She looked through the windshield at the concrete of the parking structure. You don't have to. Naomi. His voice was even. Certain. I'll be there in 20 minutes. For a while it had seemed like everything was finally going right. But life does not protect happy endings. It gives them to you and then waits to see what you're made of. This was what Jae-min was made of. He arrived in 18 minutes. He found Naomi in the consultation waiting area, still in her coat, still holding her keys. He sat down beside her. He did not say the usual things. He did not say it will be okay or she's going to be fine. He was not a man who said things he could not guarantee. He said, "Tell me everything the doctor said." Exactly. So she told him. Every detail. The specific type. The treatment protocol. The timeline. The odds. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "There's a pediatric oncology team at Asen Medical Center. They've had the best outcomes in Seoul for this specific diagnosis for the past 4 years. I know the department director personally. I'm going to call him tonight." Naomi looked at him. "This is going to be expensive." "That's not a consideration. Jae-min." "It is not a consideration," he said again, quietly and finally. "Lila sat beside me every day when I was gone. I am going to sit beside her every day now. That's how this works." Naomi looked at him for a long time. The keys in her hand. The cold air of the hospital corridor. The particular loneliness of being a single mother who had been carrying everything for so long that she had forgotten there was another way. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. The treatment began. Jae-min arranged the transfer to Asen Medical Center. He arranged everything with the systematic efficiency of a man who had spent his life moving pieces, except now the piece he was moving was a 4-year-old girl who had once placed a yellow blanket on the arm of a chair so an unconscious man would know someone had been there. He showed up every morning before the first treatment session. He was there when Lila woke up and there when she fell asleep and there in the hours between. He slept in the chair beside her bed, the same model of vinyl chair that had once been beside his bed, and did not complain about it. Lila lost energy in the first weeks of treatment. The brightness went out of her eyes, not extinguished but dimmed, the way a light source dims when the power drops. She was sick some mornings. She slept more. She stopped talking as much, which was the thing that was hardest, that particular silence from a child who had always understood the weight of things. But she held his hand. That was the thing. She was tired and she was sick and she was 4 years old facing something no 4-year-old should face. And she held his hand with the same certainty with which she had held the hand of an unconscious stranger in a hospital corridor 7 months ago. She did not loosen her grip. She did not let go. He talked to her. He was not, by nature or training, a man who talked freely. He had spent 2 decades in rooms where silence was currency. But he sat beside this child and talked. He told her about the shipping lanes, about what Seoul looked like from the top of his tower in Gangnam, and promised to show her. About a trip he had taken at 23 to a small island on the southern coast where the sea was a green he had never seen anywhere else. "We can go," Lila said one afternoon, her voice thin but present. "When I'm better." "We'll go," he said. "You have to promise." "I promise." She closed her eyes. "Okay." A pause. "You can let go of my hand now. I'm going to sleep." He did not let go. Naomi found him at 3 in the morning, sitting in the chair with Lila's hand in his and his head back against the wall, asleep. She stood in the doorway. The monitor beeped. Lila's chest rose and fell. The city outside was quiet. She had been alone with this for so long. The weight of Lila. The weight of everything. She had carried it because there was no one else to carry it with, and she had never allowed herself to grieve that fact. Because grieving things that won't change is a luxury that requires more emotional space than she'd had in years. But here was a man who had shown up. Who kept showing up. Not because she asked, not because it served him, but because in his recalibrated understanding of what mattered, this was what mattered. She walked to the other chair. She sat down. She looked at her daughter's sleeping face. "I notice you're not leaving," she said quietly. He opened his eyes. He had not been fully asleep. Men like him rarely were. "No," he said. "You've been here every day for 3 weeks. I'm aware. It's going to be months of treatment. Also aware." She looked at him. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "She stayed when I was gone," he said. "I'm staying now." He looked at Lila. Simple as that. Naomi was quiet for a long time. The machines breathed. Outside the window, Seoul continued its nighttime business. "I'm scared," she said finally. Not quietly. Not carefully. The word came out raw and unguarded, the way a wound sounds when it finally opens. Not a whisper but an exhale, years of holding it together leaking through a single crack in the armor of a woman who had never once let anyone see her break. I know. His voice was steady. I'm here. She looked at him. She looked away. She put her head back and closed her eyes. She was not alone. For the first time in longer than she could honestly remember, she was not alone with the heaviest thing she had ever carried. Stay with us. We're almost there and the ending is worth it. Like and subscribe if you're still here. Week 6. Lila had not spoken for 2 days. Not because she could not, the doctors said. Sometimes the body goes inward. Sometimes it needs everything it has for the fight it's fighting, and there is nothing left over for words. She lay in the bed. Her hand was in Jae-min's hand. He had not left the room since Monday. He talked to her. He kept talking to her, the way she had once kept talking to him, quiet and steady and without asking for anything in return. He told her about the island again. The green sea. The fishing boats at dawn. He told her about the galbi gym she was going to make for him when she was better, and how he expected it to be better than the dunjangjigi, which she would want to dispute, and he was looking forward to the dispute. He told her about the yellow blanket she had left on the chair. You did that, he said quietly, so I would know someone had been there. Do you remember? Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was slow. I want you to know, he said, that someone is here now. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You can take as long as you need. He pressed his thumb gently against the back of her hand. Then her fingers moved. Just slightly. A small curl of her fingers around his. A reflex, the doctors might have said. The body's response to pressure. But Jae-min knew the difference between a reflex and a choice. He had learned it the night she had reached out in a hospital corridor and closed her hand around his while he was being wheeled away from everything. Her eyes opened. Slow. Blinking against the light. Traveling the ceiling. Then finding his face. You stayed, she said. His voice when it came was not entirely steady. It broke on the edges just slightly. The way a man's voice breaks when something too big moves through a space that was built to hold nothing like it. You taught me how. Lila looked at him for a long moment with those eyes that had always seen more than they should. I knew you would, she said. She recovered. It was not instant. It was not clean. There were 3 more weeks of treatment and setbacks and good days followed by bad days followed by the grind of simply continuing. But she recovered. The markers improved. The doctors used words like remission and response. By March they were talking about discharge. The morning they brought her home, Lila sat in the wheelchair in the hospital lobby and looked at the tall glass doors and said, Can we get ice cream? It's 8 in the morning, Naomi said. So, Jae-min looked at Naomi. Naomi looked at him. They got ice cream. The months that followed were ordinary in the way that only extraordinary people can make ordinary. Lila went back to school. She grew her hair again. She returned to her YouTube cooking lessons with renewed confidence, and the dinners on Friday nights continued, and her galbi gym was, objectively, slightly better than the dunjangjigi, which Jae-min never admitted publicly. He came to those dinners every week. He stopped coming like a visitor and started coming like someone who lived nearby, which eventually he did, because he bought the apartment 2 floors up in the same building without making a particular announcement about it. Naomi found out when the building manager mentioned his name. She brought it up on a Friday night after dinner. You bought an apartment in my building, she said. Convenient location, he said. For what? He looked at her. Just looked at her the way he looked at things he was certain about. For this, he said. All of this. Naomi looked at the table. The paper flower in the cup. The dishes from dinner. Lila's drawing notebook open on the counter. The latest page visible. 2 figures and a small one between them beside a window. She had been drawing them that way for months. The 3 of them. Together. As if she had decided it before any of the adults had. You're building something, Naomi said. Yes. Here. Yes. She looked at him. Are you asking me something? He was quiet. He was not a man who was imprecise. I am telling you, he said carefully, that I would like to keep building it. If that's what you want. She held his gaze. It's what Lila wants. I know what Lila wants. I'm asking what you want. The apartment was quiet. Outside, Seoul moved through its evening. Somewhere below, the city hummed with the particular energy of a place that never fully sleeps. In the next room, Lila was already asleep, the yellow blanket from the hospital that she had refused to relinquish folded at the foot of her bed. I want this, Naomi said quietly. All of it. But I need you to understand that I have never done anything by halves. If this is what we're doing it completely. So do I, he said. And yes. She nodded. She looked at the drawing on the counter. The three figures beside the window. Lila's going to say she knew, she said. She's going to be right, he said. The wedding happened on a Saturday in June. Civil paperwork. 2 witnesses. Dinner afterward at a restaurant in Itaewon that served both Korean and American food, and Lila could order macaroni and cheese if she wanted, which she did. Jae-min had spent the previous year dismantling the parts of his empire that could not survive daylight. What remained was legitimate: 2 logistics companies, a shipping operation, and investment portfolio. He established a foundation with Samsung Medical Center funding pediatric oncology research. He named it, without announcement, the Lila Foundation. Naomi found out when she read the incorporation documents. She sat with them for 3 days. Then she found him on a Thursday evening and said, "The foundation." He looked at her. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah," he said. She looked out the window. When she looked back, her eyes were clear. She's going to be so proud of herself. She should be. On a Sunday morning in July, Jae-min was at the kitchen counter making coffee when Lila came in wearing her pajamas and her yellow blanket wrapped around her like a cloak. She climbed onto the stool at the counter and propped her chin on her hands and watched him. "What?" he said. "Nothing." She kept watching. "Lila, I'm just looking at you." She tilted her head. "Do you know what I thought the very first time I saw you?" He turned to look at her. "What?" "I thought he looks like someone who forgot something important." She considered this. "I was right, wasn't I?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "You were right." She nodded as if this confirmed something she had long suspected. "Good thing I reminded you." He set down his coffee. He moved around the counter and he crouched down so he was at her level. This child who had decided things about him before he was in any position to decide anything about himself. This small, stubborn, certain person who had placed a yellow blanket on a chair so a stranger would know he was not alone. "It's a very good thing," he said. She put her arms around his neck. He held her. This man who had controlled empires and understood leverage, and had spent 20 years surrounded by people who needed him for what he had. He held this child who had needed nothing from him at all, who had simply decided he was worth staying beside. From the hallway, Naomi watched them. She did not announce herself. She stood there in the morning light of the apartment they had built from impossible circumstances, with the city laid out below the window and the smell of coffee in the air and the sound of her daughter's voice, fully and ferociously alive. The man who had once controlled an empire finally had something he couldn't lose. And this time he knew exactly what to do with it. If this story found you right when you needed it, share it. Someone out there needs to hear this today. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that remind you why it's worth staying.